All right, what's up, folks? Welcome back to the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast, the regularly scheduled edition, the Week 4 DFS preview for FanDuel and DraftKings. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder, co-host here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Mr. 6 o'clock shadow himself, Chris Rooney. What's up, man?
All show like this. That's enough of that. So listen, I mean, week 3, Brian, it really, to me, I think, main slate anyway, came down to two things. Either you played Tyler Lockett in cash or you didn't. Either you stacked the Cowboys and the Seahawks in tournaments or you didn't. And I think it's a good reminder that, as much as we put a lot of research and effort into trying to figure out what the optimal plays are each week, it really can come down to just being wrong on one specific choice. So, if you're having a tough season so far, like I am, like I believe you are as well, you got to understand these things can turn around pretty quickly.
Absolutely. It's, again, if you expect to win every single slate in DFS, then you are in the wrong hobby, or in some cases, profession. So let's just be realistic about the outcomes, and we're going to continue to provide the best information that we can. We are working with a game with incomplete information, but over the course of a season, we're going to come out ahead more often than not. And even if we lose more often than we win, some of our high-risk selections and strategies, those payouts are going to be massive compared to some of the losses you've accrued over the season. So looking forward to some of those spike weeks myself. Just a reminder before we get into the Week 4 edition, the lineup builder is ready to go again for the Week 4 slate. Our lineup builder, occupyfantasy.com/lineup builders, where you can learn more. Occupy members have access to build up to 150 lineups and or create just a handful of lineups using our optimal lineup criteria. Go back and listen to our special edition podcast with our member Swag Lower Kin, who used the builder to win nearly $48,000 on FanDuel on Monday night. All right, Chris, let's talk about some Week 3 injuries. Fortunately, not nearly as bad as Week 2 in this regard, but Chris Carson, we saw him go down near the end of the game with a sprained knee. Sounds like he's more doubtful this week, even though it's not a long-term injury, which should mean more Carlos Hyde and even Travis Homer in Week 4.
Yeah, so I think this happened pretty late in the game. They're calling it a knee sprain. It looks like Hyde did out-touch Homer. Hyde's the veteran who probably they will lean on here, but I'm a little more interested in Travis Homer. I think he is a more dynamic player. So I think as we get closer to Sunday, we want to see what Pete Carroll and the Seahawks have to see about that before we make any decisions.
For sure. And our boy, unfortunately, Chris Godwin, pulled up late, has a hamstring injury, likely out 2 games, it sounds like. Scotty Miller's also dealing with some injuries. Justin Watson's dealing with some injuries. Tyler Johnson, the rookie, stepped in and played for the first time last week. So what's the read on this situation for Tampa's receivers?
Yeah, it does look like, as we always say here, we are recording on Wednesday. It seems like Justin Watson did return to practice, so he's the one that I have my eye on the most. He actually did run the most routes. We're going to do that again. He played the most out of all these receivers in Week 2 when Godwin last missed a game. Now you throw in the caveat of Scotty Miller being a little banged up. Justin Watson could be the biggest beneficiary if he's able to be a full go here in Week 4 as far as I'm looking at it.
Awesome. Okay, let's go to the speaking of injuries, the Philadelphia Eagles, no strangers to injuries. Deshaun Jackson is, I guess, questionable at best after pulling his hamstring on Sunday. And then Dallas Goedert, we get word that he has a fracture in his ankle, out 6 to 8 weeks roughly. I mean, this should just be a massive boost for Zach Ertz, I think.
Yeah, I would think so as well. I mean, assuming they just don't punt off on playing offense entirely again here. No, seriously. It looks like they also placed Jalen Reagor, the wide receiver, the first-round pick there, on injured reserve. So very, very thin. I guess either Zach Ertz or Greg Ward, AAF superhero, who had a decent game last week as well, are probably the best options for Carson Wentz and potentially even Jalen Hurts if it gets to that point.
Please put in Jalen Hurts just so we could see it happen. And let's go out to Oakland. A couple receiver injuries for them. Ruggs is out once again this week. Bryan Edwards, 2 rookie receivers. Edwards has a high ankle sprain. He's been ruled out. So it's likely just going to be the Darren Waller show, but old friend Nelson Aguilar could be in the mix.
Yeah, assuming that he just continue dropping every pass that goes his way. I know that was a big thing for you last year. He played the most out of all these receivers against the Patriots. And now with Edwards looking like he's going to be ruled out entirely, I think that just solidifies his role. Don't forget about Hunter Renfrow either. Obviously, a slot specialist there. And Derek Carr loves to check down. So it looks like Renfro, Waller, Nelson Aguilar are probably your best options with these Raiders in week 4.
Sounds good to me. So let's talk about how some of these new backfields looked in week 3. Week 2, all the injuries struck. Last week we talked about how Mike Davis and Jerick McKinnon and the Rams backfield, how we thought it would shake out. And honestly, it kind of did. The big surprising thing to me was Mike Davis. Jesus, he basically took on a Christian McCaffrey plus role. Nearly 37 weighted opportunities in week 3. It's nuts.
Yeah, 13 carries, 9 targets. I mean, he's very interesting this week, Brian. I mean, we'll get into this a little later on, but really hypothetically like this Arizona and Carolina game in week 4. So Mike Davis might be a huge piece there. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that he's going to be the guy until Christian McCaffrey is ready to go. I don't think Reggie Bonifant there, who they just brought back off the practice squad, is really going to be super involved. Certainly wasn't in week 3 anyway. And I know we had some theories about Curtis Samuel being kind of a running back threat here, given his role in Ohio State back in college, but that didn't really materialize to the degree that some of us out there were expecting. So just lock and load Mike Davis as far as Carolina running backs are concerned. He is you cannot argue with that type of workload for any running back, no matter what their name is. So I like it a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, the coaching staff has flat out told us that he's the guy. And then in week 3, they go out and show us that he's the guy. So until we have something different to change our minds, he is the guy in Carolina. Now, here's the rare situation where you and I were on kind of different sides, and we were both completely correct. Thanks to San Francisco's dominance in week 3. Jerick McKinnon, 18 opportunities. Jeff Wilson, 15 opportunities. They both scored. Jeff Wilson was in the winning millionaire lineup on DraftKings, and McKinnon was in a lot of GPP lineups that finished high. So not really too surprising, I guess, considering this offensive scheme.
Always great when we sit here, Brian, week in and week out, and we talk about just kind of building around the high-owned running backs. They're the smartest plays, and then you look at the winning millionaire maker lineup, and it's got 2, I think, 4K punts at running back with Jeff Wilson, I believe Rex Burkhead with his 3 touchdown game. So DFS is a sick game, right? The thing here that actually surprised me the most with the Niners, and I know you want to talk about these running backs, but it's actually Brandon Ayuk. I mean, he had a little bit of that Deebo Samuel type of role, right, with a few jet sweep handoffs, and he actually had a touchdown run himself, as well as seeing the most targets from Nick Mullins in that game against the Giants. So, you know, Brandon Ayuk might be in line for a lot larger workload than we anticipated. Now, no Jordan Reed. He's injured again. Surprise, surprise. So in addition to this running back situation, which is probably going to be messy, always, even when we get, you know, Mostert and Coleman back, this is just what Kyle Shanahan does, right? He uses all of his running backs, likes to make a lot of use of all of his personnel and use them effectively at that position anyway. So I like the receiver here in Ayuk, and I think he should be an interesting play, not just in week 4, but moving forward if he's fully healthy and ready to go.
For sure. And let's talk about the Rams backfield. Still uncertain if Cam Akers is going to return in week 4. They were without him last week, and Darrell Henderson took over. He and Malcolm Brown played equal amount of snaps, but Henderson actually dominated the opportunity. Looked like the guy we were expecting last year when we were drilling over him after being drafted by the Rams. And he's a perfect fit for this offense right now and looks explosive.
This is such a tough thing with these Rams, man, because I think McVay is on the record as saying that it's week to week and it's game plan specific. Obviously, the game plan with no Akers, especially against the Bills, centered around Darrell Henderson. So, you know, I think Henderson is going to be a very popular play this week, to be frank with everybody that's listening or watching. I don't think that it's as safe as we might be assuming, just because he got 20 touches on the ground last week for that reason. That's really the only thing to be skeptical about here is, do they decide to take the game plan in a different direction in week 4? I do think Henderson's an awesome player, but I just don't trust Sean McVay to continue to give him that large of a workload, frankly.
That's fair, especially if Akers returns. Now, the Rams are running on a higher percentage of first and second down runs this year than they have in years past. They're actually near the top of the league in both categories. So that does raise his floor a bit. But again, if Akers returns, maybe the game plan changes. Either way, something to keep an eye on. If this happens one more time, like this, it could legit be the Henderson show for the rest of the year. And I don't want to spend more than like 20 seconds on this next backfield. But the New York Giants, like literally no one returned any value in week 3. Should we expect anything different in week 4 and beyond?
I think the only Giants player I'm interested in playing right now is Darius Slayton. I assume this team is going to continue to be absolute trash, and so they're going to be chasing points. And I think their number one receiver is an interesting play. I guess I was too quick to say that. I mean, Golden Tate actually has had a pretty interesting role the last couple of weeks, so he's still pretty affordable in DFS. So I would give him a look as well. But yeah, I mean, the Giants are just tough, man. I don't know if we can really spend too much more time on this. I'm already getting sick thinking about it.
Cool. All right. Let's move on to week 4 then, and let's analyze from a high level like we normally do. When we take a look at a slate, we start from the team level, see which teams are in good spots, which games could potentially shoot out, and then we drill down to the player level beyond that. So looking at the week 4 betting market, we got some big spreads. Baltimore 13-point favorites over the Washington football team. The Rams 13-point favorites over the aforementioned Giants. Buccaneers 7.5-point favorites over the Chargers. Chiefs 7.5, or just a 7-point favorite over the Patriots. That's an interesting line for me. And the Seattle Seahawks are 6.5-point favorites on the road in Miami. Takeaways.
I was coming into this week before watching Monday Night Football, gearing up to be very excited to play Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think they didn't let us forget that that's how you say that.
Dude,
during that game,
they made sure that is how you say that
name. He actually was not getting as much work as I thought he was going to get. Now, I don't know if that was just game plan specific against the Ravens, but Darrell Williams, played a lot more than I wanted to see, frankly, to feel better about Helaire here. Or Edwards-Helaire here. So I still think he's an intriguing play, especially for low risk as a touchdown favorite at just 6,400. But the guy on here that you didn't mention, I want to make sure I'm correct here. Yeah, you didn't speak about this team yet. I think David Johnson is intriguing if we get this Texans and Vikings game. I know there's that other situation we haven't addressed yet. In case anybody is living under a rock, both the Vikings and the Titans have suspended in-person activities because of some positive coronavirus tests on the Titans side, so we'll see what happens there. But assuming this game goes off without a hitch, Brian, I mean, without Duke Johnson being active the last couple of weeks, David Johnson's had a really, really awesome role, but in some tough matchups against the best teams in football. The way the Texans' schedule has played out the first 3 weeks of the season has been pretty brutal. But now they're playing an 0-3 Vikings team. I really like David Johnson, I think, for low risk, and really like Ezekiel Elliott as well. I mean, I know we haven't necessarily talked Cowboys yet either, but I think his workload has been really, really strong.
Yeah, I mean, those two teams are also in the projected highest totals of the week, according to the betting markets. Cleveland and Dallas, 55-point total. Yeah. Minnesota and Houston, 54.5. I mean, we legit have, I'm counting here on my fingers, 7 games totals 50 or higher on the main slate.
Yeah,
and I know, and I've seen, some talk on the Twitter timeline here about, the lack of penalties being called and the lack of a home field advantage, being attributing factors to these higher scoring games 2-3 weeks. The betting markets have been quick to adjust, and that's why we see these higher totals. So, lots of options here, both from an offensive standpoint and low risk contest, but then also game stacks, which we'll get to later.
Yep, absolutely. Very interesting choices can be made at running back because we do have quite a few mid-range to low-range price guys that I think are viable this week, with not just Mike Davis, who we already mentioned, but Myles Gaskin with these Miami Dolphins, who should be playing in a pace-up situation against Russell Wilson and the Seahawks. Gaskin getting a lot of targets. So this is a very interesting slate, man. Very, very intrigued in terms of thinking about how we're going to attack this for tournaments. And I do think a big part of that, as always is the case here at Occupy, right, is this underperforming wide receiver list. I know that you're excited to talk not just to me, but to the listeners about our debut underperforming wide receiver list of the season.
Hell yeah. I'm super pumped. We got the list last night. And for those who weren't around last season or don't know what this is, or maybe just forgot, it's okay. Underperforming receivers are wide receivers who, over the last 3 weeks, have been seeing a high number of opportunities, whether it's through the air yards, percentage of their team's targets, and for whatever reason, they haven't been performing up to expectations. And when we say expectations, we mean what their expected fantasy points should be based on the volume that they've been getting. That includes not scoring touchdowns, that includes not securing receptions. For whatever reason, we don't look too much at the details about why it happened. We don't need to. In fact, these list of receivers every single week outperform their expectations by a wide margin every single time. Now, not all these players are going to go off this week, but they're more likely to exceed expectations than any of the other wide receivers on the entire slate. If you need any further proof that these are the receivers you want to play week in and week out, I literally used 4 of them in my WFFC lineup that took down 250K. Literally 4 of my tight end and 3 receivers were from this list. So if you need any more proof, there it is. So, Chris, we got a long list of guys this week. We got the usual suspects that we always talk about on this list, but also some interesting names. So what stood out to you?
You just mentioned, obviously, the great day you had last December using receivers from this list. Brian, the thing that stands out to me is our ability to game stack actually using this list. And assuming that we get him back, Christian Kirk with the Arizona Cardinals is an interesting play. He's 3rd highest on our list here. And then we also have DJ Moore with the Carolina Panthers, who is seeing a ton of targets and area opportunity for them, but didn't necessarily have the results in week 3. So to a large degree, DJ Moore than Christian Kirk is exciting to me. We still have old friends AJ Green, Deshaun Jackson on here. So assuming Djax is able to get through his injury and play, that will be interesting. But I'm mostly focused on this Arizona and Carolina spot, frankly. And you know what? Before I give it back to you, I want to mention obviously Keyshawn Johnson as well, who played a lot without Christian Kirk in the lineup. So it does look like we'll have an Arizona underperformer option either way, regardless, how this plays out.
Yeah, a lot of people will look to Andy Isabella, who scored 2 touchdowns last week. However, he didn't play as many snaps as Keyshawn Johnson. Actually, didn't even get as many expected fantasy points. Or if you look at their expected fantasy points between the two, Keyshawn actually was supposed to score more based on his opportunity, 15 expected fantasy points. So, interesting spot regardless. DJ Moore, in fact, of this entire list, this list of 10 to 12 names, has the second most highest expected points over the first 3 weeks of the season. He's expected to have scored 50 fantasy points through 3 weeks. He's only scored 38, still pretty good. But these are the real names you want to target, guys who have high expected fantasy points and still have scored some, but not a ton. And DJ Moore tops that list here. Now, to get into this in detail, Chris, you're going to list these in the daily plug on Friday. Maybe give a little context to it. And then if you're using the lineup builder, all of these guys will have an indicator, a little trendy indicator icon that you can easily identify and add to your lineup. So super pumped for that too, Chris.
Yeah, no, it's going to be awesome to finally have that ready to go in the lineup builder for everybody to utilize. And just so far as plug readers are concerned, you'll get your normal list of low and high risk players at each position. And then under the wide receiver section, we will just list out all of our favorite underperforming wide receivers. There are a few on this list that we're working with right now that may not make the cut. An example is somebody like Chris Conley, who is underperforming his opportunity.
Yes, yes.
But with DJ Chark practicing and on track to return to the lineup for the Jaguars against the Bengals this week, that obviously kind of muddies the waters for him. So just so everybody understands, those are the kind of decisions we make when we look at the numbers here. It's largely data driven, but when we have real, tangible news related reasons to sort of upgrade or downgrade a guy, we do that as well.
For sure. And if you are listening to this podcast before the Thursday night showdown slate locks, there are 3 guys from that game on this list: Jerry Jeudy, our boy KJ Hamler, and don't forget Chris Hogan, who's on the list. Now, Jameson Crowder is expected to be back, and maybe he gets the Chris Conley treatment on this list. But 3 guys to keep an eye on. And again, that'll be in the Daily Plug Thursday edition. So, all right, let's move on to the Occupy model, what we're looking at for projected volume in Week 4. Who are some of the highest projected targets in our model for Week 4 that stand out to you, Chris?
Allen Robinson leading the way for the main slate in our model with the Chicago Bears, now with Big Dick Nick at the helm under center. So I feel like a lot of Bears fans are kind of happy to see that. I'm sure it may have happened before. I've never seen a 2-0 team bench their starter before, but hey, it is what it is. These Falcons, man. I don't want to get too distracted, but unbelievable.
Wow.
Keenan Allen is tied with Allen Robinson for projected targets for us. So we project both to be between 10 and 11, and Keenan's coming off, just an awesome game in Week 3. He had a ton of targets, converted a ton of them into actual fantasy points and production on the field. So this is who he is. He does this all the time when he's healthy. You should feel pretty comfortable locking him into your lineups if you like him this week. We just talked about him at length. DJ Moore, we project him for 10 targets. Can't argue with that. And he's underperforming. Seems like a pretty good play, especially in high risk. Odell Beckham seems to always be on the underperforming list. Didn't talk about him yet today, but he is on that list again this week. We project him for just under 10 targets against the Dallas Cowboys in a game where Baker Mayfield and the Browns are most likely probably going to be chasing points against that high volume Cowboys offense. So probably want to consider Odell heavily. And then Mike Evans, we project him for 9.5. So call it 9 to 10 targets. Questions with pretty much every other receiver on the Buccaneers. So I think Evans is a really intriguing play as well.
Yeah, all these guys make sense. High floor, high ceiling options, especially in terms. I mean, Allen Robinson, Keenan Allen dominating opportunities for both of their teams. And as of late, a quarterback upgrade, at least for their fantasy prospects. A-Rob getting Nick Foles. Keenan, Justin Herbert's been looking for him every single play. So really big quarterback upgrades for them. Really like all 5 of those guys this week. All right, let's move on to tight ends. We'd like to point out routes runned leaders from the previous week. This segment's normally sponsored by Logan Thomas, so no surprise he headlines this week. Chris, any tight end usage that stood out to you from week 3 that we can maybe utilize for week 4?
Very scary how similar we think, because I was just about to say that this is effectively the Logan Thomas section of the show. Logan Thomas running a route on 95% of Haskins dropbacks against the Cleveland Browns in week 3. That's been the story of his season. Pretty much every week, he is one of the most involved receivers for Washington other than Terry McLaurin. He's like the other guy. He's had 7+ targets in every game so far this year. You know, he is an underperforming tight end, I guess is the best way to really explain it. And it just feels like I'm cutting the section that we had in last week's show, asking you to just drop it right back into this one, right? I mean, at the workload and the volume that he is getting, where his price is in DFS this week, I'm going to continue to chase it. I mean, it just, you're not going to get a much better picture than that for just $3,500 on DraftKings. And just giving you his correct FanDuel price here, 49 on FanDuel. So
it's too cheap.
It's just, and they're playing the Ravens, who are looking to bounce back from a disappointing game against the Chiefs on Monday Night Football in week 3. So should be a higher scoring affair, which means Dwayne Haskins should lean on his best pass game weapons. And it looks like Logan Thomas is one of those guys. So again, don't want to get carried away talking about Logan here, but if he continues to see this many routes run, then we're going to talk about him every single week. It is what it is. TJ Hawkinson, Brian, leaped to the top of the target tree for Matthew Stafford against the Cardinals in week 3. He tied for the most targets with 7 in that game, and he's at the upper end of this list at the tight end position. So I think it's time we talked a little bit more at length about him. I mean, he's certainly looking intriguing. I know that injuries really hampered him in 2019, so we didn't talk about him much, but this is, I mean, he was a very, very highly touted draft prospect in that 2019 draft class. And it's starting to look like he's becoming the player everybody thought he would be based off of this usage. So really interested in him this week as well. And then a player that people are probably surprised to hear about. Well, why don't you tell me your thoughts on Ian Thomas? Because that's who I wanted to talk about here. I mean, you have the same list as well. I mean, what do you think about him this week going into that matchup with the Cardinals?
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy because he's out there running routes, right? Like he's out there 83% of the dropbacks last week out there running, but getting some Chris Hogan treatment, right? Just out there running wind sprints because only 2 targets last week, hasn't been targeted heavily at all in any of the games. So it's kind of, if you're looking at these numbers yourself, it's definitely a twofold component. Obviously, you want guys out there running routes, but also they can't just be out there running and not getting any attention. Targets are an indicator of talent and opportunity. And so if he's not getting the targets, it's hard to predict him to get more targets moving forward, even though it's only been 3 weeks. But at least Chris, to me, looks like he's out there, but he's not heavily involved in his offense and may not be unless something changes.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly, when you talk about the tight ends that are priced, you know, in his range, which is even lower than Logan Thomas, he's probably one of the better plays down there. But beyond that, it's really tough. I mean, I probably am not using him this week outside of game stack environments if I choose to go that route. So Jimmy Graham, big day, especially when Big Dick Nick took over for Nick Foles, people who aren't wise to it, who, as soon as he took over, Jimmy Graham really kind of had a big day, 10 targets, ran a route on over 81% of the dropbacks for the entire game between the two quarterbacks that were out there. So I think he's in play. And then with the showdown slate coming up on Thursday, Chris Herndon is still very involved, mostly because the Jets don't have any NFL players, but he's still an option, I think, as well.
For sure. So you talked about game stacks. Let's transition here to our last segment. I called you the game stack guru on Twitter last week, and you held your throne for the third week in a row to start the season. You nailed the game stack that was going to be in the optimal lineup, the millionaire winning lineup. Called it in week 1, called it in week 2. A little bit of an easier call in week 3, but I'll still give you credit because you called it in the daily plug. And normally you list 3 stacks in the daily plug, and as you're narrowing down your options, who are some of the 4 or 5 games you're eyeing this week that could potentially be in that $1 million lineup?
I think the obvious one this week, Brian, is the Browns and the Cowboys. I mean, when you have Dak Prescott passing as much as he has been, a lot of that has been game script driven. I understand that, but he's able to make big plays with his legs. He's got some of the best receivers in the entire game. He's got Ezekiel Elliott in the backfield, and those are the guys that get all the opportunities. At least we thought they were until Cedric Wilson showed up against the Seahawks. I still think that was kind of fluky. Not sure what was going on with. I guess the one thing to talk about there is CeeDee Lamb's usage did dip a little bit, so that is concerning. I don't know if there's any injury concern there that we should be looking into. So that's a little bit of a homework assignment, I guess, for the listeners, is keep an eye on that. But focusing just on the main guys here. That would be, for me, that would be Dak, Amari Cooper, Ezekiel Elliott. Can't ask for much more opportunity than those 3 guys see week in and week out. And then with the Browns, I don't think that he's really been challenged to do this yet, talking about Baker here, because the game against the Ravens was just so non-competitive that I think that they were just looking forward to that game clock expiring altogether. I think he can still sling the rock a little bit here, and you couldn't ask, other than the Cowboys side here, you couldn't ask for better weapons, in my opinion, than Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, Austin Hooper, Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt to throw the football to, if you are forced to do so. So I think Chubb will be a little bit of an interesting call for people in game stacks, because not getting a ton of the targets, it does seem like that is Kareem Hunt's role for them, Brian. But I do think both of those guys are in play here just because they're explosive players. And obviously talked about how Odell is one of our underperformers. So I know that's a lot on just one game here, but I think it's because, for me anyway, far and away, that's my favorite game this week. The other 3 that I'm looking at, I haven't made my final decisions yet for the plug. Got a little bit of time for that on you. I like the Vikings and the Texans. I do like this Cardinals and Panthers game we've talked about a little bit. And Fitzmagic has entered the conversation, Brian. We have him and Russell Wilson facing off. I don't know if out of these 3, there's any one of them that jumps out to you at all that you'd like to talk about.
Well, I'm a sucker for the underperforming receiver. So if we get the ability to stack 2 of them in a game stack, Arizona, Carolina, I'm in. That's the one. Also, obviously, I'm biased towards Arizona since I clearly can't stop stacking them since the beginning of last year. So if you had to place a bet, that's probably the favorite that I'm going to stack this week. So I really like that one. Seattle, Miami is really interesting. I don't think a lot of people are going to stack it. I think a lot of people are just going to assume Seattle runs away with that game, but a lot of options there. And Seattle's given up a ton of yards on defense too. So that's a really interesting call. There's some other games that could sneak in there as well with high totals. So I'm really curious. I'm looking forward to Friday when the plug drops, so I can get started building my 150.
Yeah, well, there you go. And I'll be working hard on grinding the data here to make my decisions as well for the 20 lineups I plan on running at some lower stakes, because I'm not as hashtag how rich as you are yet. So
keyword is yet. I mean, the keyword is exactly. Yet.
We're chasing it. And before we go, I mean, I really appreciate Swag Lord Ken joining you. I believe it was yesterday. I already had a chance to check that out. That was an awesome interview. For those who may have missed that or just jumping in for this, one of our members, Swag Lord Ken, tied for first, obviously, in the Monday Night Football Millionaire Maker slate on FanDuel. Very humble kid. I gave Brian an awesome interview. Check that one out before you prepare for week 4 yourselves.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. Yeah, and awesome interview. Kim was a great interview, and super pumped to see it happen to a good guy like him. So again, if you're listening to this in your podcast apps, you can just it's the previous episode. If you're here on YouTube, just click our channel You'll be able to find it. Speaking of that, got to ask you, subscribe in your favorite podcast app or here on YouTube. That way you just get notified whenever we release a new podcast episode. So that'll do it for this week 4 edition. For Chris Rooney, I'm Brian Jester from Occupy Fantasy. We appreciate you listening. Good luck this week, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.